Welcome to Maintainable, the podcast where we explore the art, and sometimes the mess, of software that lasts. We talk to seasoned practitioners who have wrestled with technical debt, untangled legacy code, and helped teams build sustainable, resilient systems. Because good software isn't just about shipping fast, it's about making it last. I'm your host, Robbie Russell. On this episode, I'm joined by Melanie Sumner, Product Accessibility Lead for Design Systems at HashiCorp. She shares how her team built a unifying design system across multiple legacy products and why aligning the API between Figma and code was a real game changer. We talk about her work making Ember JS more accessible, the idea of continuous accessibility, and why HTML's forgiving nature might be doing more harm than good. Melanie joins us from Chicago, Illinois, in the United States. Melanie Sumner, we're so glad to have you join us on Maintainable. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Given your experience in the industry, what do you believe are a few characteristics of, dare I say, well-maintained software?
To me, I work in front-end engineering and I work in accessibility especially, so I'm kind of in a very niche spot. I also work on a design system. So for me, the characteristic is the API. Is it consistent? Is it purposeful? One of the things we've done on the design system I'm working on is we've made it so the Figma API for the designers matches the code API for the components for the engineers. And I found that it helps close this gap that you have in the front end between designers and engineers. And that's been something that was really important to me getting to work on this project that I'm on right now, because I always knew it could work that way. I always knew it could be done if you were on purpose. And so I've had the joy of getting to watch this work over the past 3 or 4 years. And it's been, I don't know, that feeling when you're right and you finally get that validation. So it's nice.
I'm curious about in that environment. So you get to be part of it. Sounds like were you there from day one of starting on that new version of that new design pattern and a new library that you're kind of working on there in project, or how much of legacy type of stuff did you have to navigate, or were you kind of able to just be like, we got a fresh new slate and then we're going to roll this out over the next X or months or years?
You know, working on this project, so this was a brand new team, the design systems team. They figured we have enough products now. We actually do need a consistent design system and visual language. But the products themselves, the code bases are 10 plus years old, and there's at least 8 or 9 products. So not only was it deciding from day one, how are we going to work as a design systems team? What does a design system mean to us? How is it different than a UI library, different than other things we worked on before? And in developing that process, we came up with a components requirement document where we pre-decided that before any designs were done or before any code was written, we'd all get together and talk about what we meant when we said a modal, what it was and what it wasn't, especially what the accessibility requirements were. How did we intend for teams to use this artifact, right? And in establishing that process, we've given our own selves a really solid base, a really solid set of rules to work from. And we've ended up with a really consistent product as a result. So maybe that's architecture, maybe that's process. There's a lot of different ways you could probably look at that and draw parallels. But I've been reading every software engineering related book I could get my hands on for the past 25 years. And everything I learned in every single one of those books has kind of gotten to come together more recently as I've had more of a say in how things are done. But in establishing this new way to work, these new components, we also had to make room for what already existed. So we have a requirement to conform it with accessibility requirements. So the default invocation of each of our components is conformant. However, we couldn't just tell teams, well, rip out what you have and put our thing in. We had to kind of give them that bridge. So sometimes we have some API in there that's meant to be that bridge. We recognize that you already have this property there. We want you to still be able to use it, but we also want to help you move away from it. So that's even included in our documentation. If you use this, your component, your app will not be accessible. It won't meet the requirements. And it's really been cool because there was some pushback from my team at first, like, oh, engineers are going to hate this. They don't want this. Turns out these ones actually like it. And they like that we've put that thought in there for them in such a way that gives them both that bridge and those guardrails for the long term. So that's been pretty neat.
How has your, something that you said in there, I'm not trying to pick on you, but you said, as you now have more of a say. So what do you think, there might be, let's just assume that there's some, maybe people listening that work on very small teams and maybe they don't work at a larger organization where they might have the resources available to have someone kind of come up and have a say in like outlining maybe a new design system and having that get rolled out across the organization. And they're kind of like trying to wrap their head around, like, maybe you can tell us a little bit about, like, can you describe what you mean by design systems and like an API means for those that might be a lot more back end focused and might be like, well, I've looked at a few blog articles here and there, but I don't fully wrap my head around this yet.
Yeah. So I work on the Helios design system at HashiCorp, and it's really about components for the web and how you can build those in a way. And we use the JavaScript framework Ember. One of the really nice things about Ember is when I say Ember, everyone that works in Ember knows exactly the stack I mean. Because if you use Ember, everyone uses the same thing. Ember data is built in, Ember CLI, the tooling, all of that stuff. If changes are made, they're made under the hood in such a way that the JavaScript engineer might have to update their knowledge, might have to, transform their code a little bit, but they know what to expect across the board. So when I mean the API for our components, what I'm talking about are maybe a button, you want an icon only button. So we have a Boolean flag is icon only, and when you say true, you can also then say which icon you want and those kinds of things. And you still have to give us the text because that becomes the ARIA label for your icon only button. So it's already accessible. We will break your build if you don't give us that information because that's what we'd need. And I'd have to go audit it and then give you a JIRA ticket that tells you to fix your bug. And so I'm just saving time and money in the process by doing it this way. But that's what I mean by API is those things that help the engineer indicate what properties and arguments they want to be available when they invoke the component.
How long have you been involved with Ember these days now?
Oh gosh. Ember found me, is what I'll say. I first heard about it back in 2014, but I didn't start using it till 2018, and I've been using it ever since.
Do you recall? I know Yehuda from like one of the original creator. Well, yeah, I think it was one of a few people that helped start the project from back in the early, come from the same like Ruby on Rails era back in the late 2000s. So I'm familiar. We've used Ember ourselves at our agency and stuff in the past as well. So it's glad to know that it's still running strong, and always curious about where people are using it these days. So is that something they're using quite a bit at HashiCorp?
All of our apps.
Oh, awesome.
What I typically have found, one of the fun things I do in the community is for a few years, I've helped with the Ember community survey. So I'll put together a survey to ask some questions. What industry are you in? How do you use the app? How many people are on your team? What does that look like? And what we found is that Ember is very popular for people who have small teams and big requirements. So I got feedback from someone who runs inventory for a school system in a big city. He's like, I couldn't have built this app and done all this by myself without Ember because everything's included and that you already have everything I need. I just did the business logic and could do what I had to do, and I can do it by myself. We find it's very popular for administrative dashboards. large banking systems, corporate investment kind of banking systems, anything that requires a lot of business logic. We have a lot of strong conventions or zero config, if you want to say it that way. You kind of get the default experience out of the box, but you also kind of have to just say, I accept that the experience that went into making this framework meant knowing some things that I might not know yet. I accept these boundaries. And it's evolved over the years because developers are kind of less accepting of those boundaries. If you were to try Ember now, you'd see it's a lot. I don't know. I had to use Vue. I had to. It was nice. I used Vue recently and the single file components, Ember's moving to those. We use Vite under the hood now for our build tool instead of Broccoli. But all of this was done in such a way that like you don't feel this pain necessarily as an Ember developer. So Ember has an RFC process. We have a long deprecation path, and we are big fans of code mods. So we'll help you move your code over as much as possible.
Hey listeners, it's Robbie here. You know, it wasn't all that long ago. I'd find myself debugging a weird issue in one of our clients' Rails apps. I log into one platform to track down the error, only to realize it was tied to some performance issue. And guess what? That meant hopping over into a completely different tool and trying to match things up based off of timestamps, if I was lucky. And let me tell you, my productivity didn't exactly thank me for that. Enter AppSignal, our podcast sponsor, and the tool that eliminates all that back and forth. They bring error tracking, performance monitoring, host metrics, custom metrics, uptime monitoring, and logging into one seamless platform. It's a single source of truth that helps keep your app running like a well-rehearsed symphony. Whether you're working with Ruby, Elixir, Node, Python, or tracking front-end errors in JavaScript, AppSignal has your back. They're always adding support for more languages and frameworks too. And here's the best part. AppSignal won't break the bank. Plans start at just $23 US a month. Plus, they're ISO 27001 certified and fully GDPR and HIPAA compliant, so your data is safe. Oh, and because you're a loyal Maintainable listener, you can use the promo code Maintainable at checkout for 10% off your first year. So head over to appsignal.com. Tell them that your good friend Robbie from Maintainable sent you and start making your app sing. I'll include links to that. Just before we got on we hit record, we found ourselves having a lot of like parallel things going on in our worlds, our background. We grew up not too far from each other apparently. But aside from that, mentioned involved with the community survey there. And I've definitely seen the Ember community survey and re-referenced it multiple times because I run the Ruby on Rails community survey. And so there's just like every couple of years we do that. And so we're always kind of like, what are other tech stacks and frameworks using and kind of things are they asking about, and kind of help inspire if we should be thinking different questions and asking of the community. So anyways, another thought I would share. There's another little fun thing. So I'll include links to both of those surveys and results in there for our listeners. All right. So I want to kind of pivot a little bit. I'm curious if, what's your take on the metaphor technical debt? Do you use it very often in the context of design systems?
That's a good question. I think the technical debt that you can incur will happen more in your applications than in your design system. And your mileage may vary here, right? It depends. Is usually the answer you're supposed to give at this stage. However, we decided at the beginning, our team decided our work takes as long as it takes because the cost of getting it wrong is pretty high for us. Not only do you lose trust from the designers and engineers who you're asking to adopt your design system, you kind of lose confidence almost in yourselves. Are we making the right decision? You end up in this like totally questioning yourself loop. And this is where I see developers getting really, I call it getting bendy with your code, where they're trying to accommodate so many things that they end up doing nothing. Might as well build it yourself, right? Really the design system's job is to be purposeful and consistent. And that means thinking slowly and being purposeful, having the right tests, having the strong conventions in place. So when I'm reviewing a PR, I can say, oh, actually, I noticed this bit of code you wrote doesn't look like something else that we did that's very similar. And we kind of have that in our design systems engineering guidelines. Go see if we've already done this in the code base. And we give new folks like time to get warmed up to the code base. And that's becoming really familiar with just the rhythm and the tempo and the style of code, which has been really helpful for us. But the technical debt is really, I've done now accessibility audits on most of our products. And what I need is for project managers to say, we're going to fix all our critical bugs by the end of the quarter, or 20% of our time is going to be spent resolving our issues, our accessibility issues. So that's more of the way I think of technical debt. But when you implement accessible code, you're implementing better code. It's more technically accurate. And I think it's a much more interesting argument to have than like tabs versus spaces or something. Like, have a formatter. Don't make me think about it. I don't care. But we'll do the same thing. It's fine. Format on safe. But accessibility, like, if it's really technically correct to the spec kind of code, it works everywhere for everyone. And that to me is really exciting. So maybe it's technical debt, but maybe it's just making improvements.
What does that process look like when, I mean, is it safe to assume that you sometimes need to come back and revisit a lot of those patterns that you're implementing, and like how does that then kick a cascade? Like if you build a bunch of functionality in your across your applications using some pattern and everything's kind of working, you're like, oh, we've learned something new, or there's something new coming in, some new browsers or new devices that are going to be interacting with this. We need to roll that out. What does that sort of process look like in that type of ecosystem? Or does that never happen?
Almost everybody on the team is at least 10 years in. So most of us have been building for the web for a really long time. And when you've been building for the web for a really long time, you have learned a few things along the way. You've learned responsive design at this point. You know more or less that you're going to have to display whatever it is you're displaying on a bunch of different viewports, and none of them are the perfect, viewport sizes that we would like to think they are. Pixel perfect is a lie. Sometimes we will get teams that bring us designs, but what we've tried to do is be in partnership with them. So you're bringing me something, you're saying our component doesn't support this thing you're trying to do. Let's be your partner and look at this together. And the designers on our team will take the time to sit with the teams and product designers and kind of look through their patterns. Could we help you think about this in a little bit different way that's more aligned with the design system we're trying to incorporate into all of the product experiences? And most of the time, that's what ends up happening. Occasionally, like we decided from the beginning that we were going to have a table component to view tabular data. But then we were also going to make room in the future to build a data grid component, which functions differently. You can have columns that resize, that reorder. You can have interaction in all the cells. And it's a different experience for accessibility too. And one of the things everybody on the team already knew from past experiences that you can't just build a table component and add everything to it. It's an accessibility nightmare. So it's almost like sometimes we have to tweak, but not very often, because we talk about how could this be used in the future? What does future us maybe want to do with this? And because most of us have had that experience, we're able to identify it first, and we have had increased trust from our consumers as a result.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know that you've also talked a lot about continuous accessibility as a mindset and a practice. So I think you've introduced a concept called continuous access. Tell us a little bit about that.
I have, so it is my registered trademark for the white paper I wrote, and I'm turning it into a book, and I'm probably actually just going to release it as like a VPress site online or something, just because I want the information out there. And it's also like, maybe I coined the phrase, but it's not a new concept, right? The idea is in the same way that we have continuous integration and continuous deployment, we could have continuous accessibility. And not only that, but it kind of takes it to an even broader perspective, I think, because we've thought about accessibility from the very start in the requirements. And then we've put it into the product lifecycle process. So when you have commit gates and you have different, we're going to scope this project. Okay. We're going to think about accessibility requirements while we scope the project or the feature. And then we're going to think about accessibility when we design it. We're going to think about it when we write the code. We're going to have tests in our apps. I worked a lot on Ember to make it more accessible out of the box. So I led a team, a working group team for about 2 or 3 years. We put a lot of linting rules into Ember template lint. Ember A11Y testing is just the thing you get built in that uses Axe Core, which is the popular accessibility testing library. And in the end, the outcome is that you are always improving. So we focus on progress, not perfection. And you're always improving your app for accessibility, and you're always shipping something that's just incrementally more accessible. And it's kind of neat because then as your designers, as your engineers get that feedback through either bugs or design review sessions, they learn and they do it better next time. And then they share it with their teams, you know? So it's this ever building on itself kind of process. It's really, I love it. It's fascinating.
What does that feedback cycle look like? Is it kind of like based off of you get like some sort of score out of that? That's like something's automated and like kind of when you run your automated tests, or something that's also like maybe doing a little bit more than just linting, or maybe it is some complex version of linting that gives you some sort of score report that you're like, is there a percentage? You're 100% accessible. I don't know if you ever attain that or not.
I don't think you can. Like maybe you could. I've never seen it yet. I don't think even people who claim to have complete accessibility, like depends on what, like browsers and assistive technology screeners, like sometimes they fight with each other. So your mileage may vary. Up until now, it's either you're accessible or you're not accessible. You're conformant or you're not conformant. And there was really no in between. We rate our accessibility issues on impact to the user. So if the user can't even log into your app, that's a critical blocker and you need to fix that now, ASAP, tomorrow, yesterday, whatever. But if you've done something that is technically incorrect, but isn't going to prohibit the user experience in any way, shape, or form, fix it when you can. So we do critical, serious, major, and minor. That's how we rate.
Severity levels.
Yeah, exactly. Severity.
Can you share an example of a UI pattern you see often? Maybe something that seems harmless at first, but turns into an accessibility problem, aside from maybe a login or something?
Nested interactive elements are one of the biggest issues I see. Well, actually, there's two. That's the first one is nested interactive elements. Developers will maybe they'll put a link, and inside that link, they'll put a button that goes to something else, but that's not separated to the user with assistive technology. So they don't get the benefit of whatever was nested. That's just not available to them. In the HTML spec, it's called presentational children. And there's certain elements that anything you put inside is considered presentational, even if it would otherwise be interactive. So this can be harmful on forms, buttons, links, things like that. That's a big one. Another one I see is people who like to add click events to divs. So they make them look like buttons. They make them act like buttons if you have a mouse. But if you were to try to navigate with a keyboard only, you would have absolutely no way to reach that button. And that's one of the blockers for like a login or even a buy now. Like if folks realize how much money they were losing because can't keyboard tab to your button. So one of the things I tell developers, especially, so we're recording this today and to May 15th, and it's Global Accessibility Awareness Day today. Happy happenstance, I think. Happy accident. And This is the day when I dole out advice to developers. What can you do? What are the things you can look for? And the first one I say is try to keyboard navigate the application you've made. You're testing anyway. You're pulling it up in your browser to see what it looks like. Did it render properly? You're a front-end engineer. Go ahead and just hit tab and see if you can navigate, see what happens. That is usually enough of an eye-opener to get people to pay a little bit more attention.
Do you have experience using like links on in the CLI at all? As like a terminal browser?
No, I have not.
Well, there's a thing you can probably quickly install with. I don't know if you're using a Mac or PC or Linux, whatever, but there's a CLI tool called Lynx. I think it's spelled Lynx, and it's a web browser for the command line, and it's been around. This is what we had before we had interactive. But you can only tab around and interact with the web page, and it just shows you the text on the page. It doesn't render any images or anything like that. So it's just these documents on the internet or whatever. But I used to try to encourage my team to play with that a little bit, to be like, look, see, this is a little complicated. But I wasn't necessarily coming at it necessarily from a super strong accessibility perspective. It was just more about like, are we using the right sort of things? And also from like back in the day, I was always like, even just as someone that necessarily wouldn't identify as needing accessibility as a thing, but being able to tab through a form drives me crazy when like the things don't go to the next field and you're like, where is this? You may or may not know this, but I like using the keyboard. And so
I've had this idea for a long time, and I would really love it if someone would make it. You know how we had those text adventure games, right? What if you had your website or your web app, but it was a text adventure game? And in the same idea, where all you can do is make a choice, go, but it's looking only at the code. So it doesn't know anything about how your UI has been presented. The pretty aspect is kind of removed, and the code speaking to the code is what remains. Because that's really what we care about. We care about how the DOM, the browser DOM, can be interpreted by a screen reader. So in that same kind of links vein, I think it would be fun to have websites, or enlightening to have websites as a text adventure game, where how far could you navigate through your website? Where do you want to go next?
We'll be right back with our interview with Melanie in just a moment. Hey, it's me, Robbie. Thank you for listening to the podcast. If you're finding Maintainable to be a worthwhile experience and use of your ear time, please consider sharing a link amongst your peers and or writing a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever people can rate these things these days. Would do me a lot of favors. Also, if you know someone in the industry you think I should have on the podcast, shoot me an email to Robbie with a Y. That's right, Robbie with a Y, ROBBY at maintainable.fm. And now back to our interview with Melanie Sumner. Yeah, I can see that being tough for a lot of applications that I'm using. But yeah, it's interesting. Come up with some interesting scenarios where it's just like any sort of user testing thing, being able to watch people, but then actually having to like navigate that yourself can be quite a challenge. I'm curious how you found yourself into this particular area. Is there something that gravitated? You mentioned that Ember found you. Like, how did accessibility find you, or vice versa?
Accessibility definitely found me first. I was working at UNC Chapel Hill. I lived there for about 10 years. And I was working there for the Department of Development, which is like the fundraising department. And one of my supervisor needed to Zoom to like 400%. He had a visual impairment. So he was always using browser Zoom. So if I didn't do things in a responsive way, he couldn't actually get to them. And then his boss was blue colorblind. And I don't know if you know anything about UNC Chapel Hill, but their Tar Heel blue is like a light sky blue. So everything to him was just shades of gray. So that's when I learned about color contrast and underlining links and all that kind of stuff that ends up being really important. I was just doing it so they would approve my work. But in doing it, I learned also you're a state university, you have accessibility requirements. I got involved with the accessibility folks at the university and just found myself really enjoying the idea of I picked a career that would allow me to be financially independent. And now I get to do good-ish with it. And getting both is what we all can wish for. Or for me, it was like I made a very pragmatic decision about my career. So finding a niche that not only I'm like in accessibility in Ember, so I'm like a super niche, and that's kind of given me some measure of, well, I'll probably always be able to find a job, at least, and provide for myself. And that means I get to be married to somebody that I love because I want to be married to them, not because I need them for anything other than like to be my partner. Right. And that kind of is what kept me in it, is that I'm satisfied with my career choice, but I'm also satisfied with what I get to do for humans. Now, I don't really talk about that a lot when I talk about accessibility. My very strict view, in my experience, you can't really talk to engineers about feelings too much. You can try, but but especially in JavaScript engineer land, I have always treated accessibility as a technical problem with a technical solution. So yes, I will go home at the end of some days and have a good cry because people were cruel. Product owners were like, why do we have to care about people with disabilities? They say something uninformed and silly like that. And some days that kind of gets to you. But for the most part, when I say, oh, we have this requirement, and I treat it like I treat security or like I treat privacy or like I treat really anything else, by giving developers the tools that they need to do this correctly, it's a technical problem with a technical solution. And that becomes a bit easier of a burden to bear than the weight of the world on my shoulders.
Do you get a sense that, maybe where you're working at, that's not maybe may or may not be an influence there, but compliancy being a driver of prioritization of this versus, everything, there's always like these risks that we're organizations are having to weigh up, like security. If like your data have a data breach, you could be liable for a lot of things. You could be, it could be a lawsuit for other types of compliancy type issues and things that are going on as well. So there's a lot of things for organizations to have to be mindful of and think about. And then it's you mentioned it's a technical problem with a technical solution. It's just whether or not this gets prioritized, right? And so do you find that compliance has ebbed and flowed over the years, or what's your kind of take on that?
That's a great question. From my viewpoint, the compliance angle has been the strongest angle, and it's only gotten stronger. Banks, federal governments, the EU, schools, all of the large enterprise clients that you're going after, they all have accessibility as a legal requirement now. And
So
even
it's a competitive advantage to be ahead of that.
exactly. So it's actually gotten me promoted a few times because I brought it up before customers have. And I've said, hey, I have experience doing this for a large corporate bank in my past, and this is a requirement. And we've talked about going for enterprise business. I think it would help us land those clients if we could say that. Sure enough, it did and has a few times. And when it comes up, when people ask, we have the answers. And that's been really kind of neat. Like, yeah, I don't have 25 years of experience for nothing. And just getting to go, like, because I did start my journey in this because the people I was working with needed it. But then I found the different ways to think about risk management, started reading all the books about risk management, metrics, KPIs, all that kind of stuff, like all of the other stuff that you might not necessarily think you'd need to read as a front-end engineer, but it's served me well in strategically planning for something like continuous accessibility as an overall concept, but also as a strategic business advantage.
I'm curious about, you piggybacking on that part, and then mentioning, talked about your experience of helping, sound like a couple-year project with Ember. There's a lot of frameworks out there, and they're probably all may or may not be trying to figure this stuff out right now. Have you been able to collaborate with other people in other frameworks that are trying to navigate that, or would that be something, if anyone's listening that does work on a framework, like we haven't really thought too much about this, or we haven't figured it out, like a good pattern? Like, is there a framework or is there a framework already for frameworks on how to go about maybe approaching this sort of potentially multi-year type of improvement process to help simplify this so that this could cascade out to more development communities?
I have heard the feedback from some other folks in frameworks that the work I've done in Ember has inspired them to do similar for the frameworks that they work on. The level of have it or don't have it varies. I have an open source project called A11Y Automation. And what I've done is I've started to catalog all of the potential violations that you could have on a web app. And then I've gone and looked for, does this have a linting rule? Does this have a test rule? Does the developer or author need to write the test? Or does this need to be manually tested because technology is not sufficiently advanced to automate this yet? So in doing that, I've gone and found there's a bit of accessibility testing in React and in Lit and in, some other frameworks. So people are trying. I also have an open source project that if they have something that I haven't learned about yet, they can just open a PR and let me know, and we can add it to the list and evaluate it for new roles. But really, Axe from DQ, they have the kind of a core library where they're doing this same kind of project for testing, and really any application could integrate it. And there's a lot of tools like Pally and Sally, and I think even in Puppeteer you can add accessibility testing now. It's becoming a lot more standard in testing frameworks because if you want to sell to enterprise companies, if you want to sell to governments, you have to have this, so you might as well do it now. So it's becoming more popular, and I'm seeing more of it happening, but I don't know. I think everybody could always do better. I mean, I think even Ember can do better. I think there's some things that were really going to help single page applications, like the new navigation API. That is really going to help with the problem of single page apps transition, but the user with the screen reader gets absolutely no notification whatsoever that such a transition has occurred. So if you go on an HTML, let's just say it's a plain HTML site, and you go from the home page to the about page to the contact us page or whatever traditionally was there, the screen reader will automatically know that a new page is loaded because it's a new URL to them, and will start reading the content on the page. Single page apps just made it look like you were getting a new URL and a new page, but you weren't really. It was just updating those pieces, those fragments, right? So we have a solution in Ember, but everyone can start to adopt the navigation API. And I think once Ember works on its router and integrates the navigation API, we won't even need the library that I built to do this for us.
Not to mention, don't break the back button.
Right? Oh, everybody breaks the back button at some point. And then you have to use your app and learn that you broke the back button. How do you avoid that? Or use an app. This is my number 2 advice for engineers. Go use apps. Go use them. See what you like and don't like. Try to just use your keyboard only on some app that's not yours. What happens? Fill out a form.
So we've touched on frameworks and standards. We want to zoom out even further to how the web itself behaves. And you've said before that HTML's tendency to render broken code has made accessibility harder. What do you wish more developers understood about that?
Because more developers are JavaScript engineers by default as a first, right?
You know what? I have to just take a moment to absorb that statement. You're right. I don't think it's really dawned on me just how
the JavaScript hammer is very large and very powerful.
It is, where there was an era in my career where we all blocked it.
Correct.
Because that was the pop-up nightmare. Yep.
So because the majority of web developers today are JavaScript engineers, because of that, they are used to it's broken if it won't build. JavaScript doesn't build if you've broken it. Well, enough. Maybe sometimes, it will, but enough. If you've broken it, if it really doesn't work, it will not build. You'll see nothing on your screen. Your console log will be full of errors and you'll fix it. Because HTML is like the parent that lets you get away with everything, it's led to the very mistaken impression that it must be fine. It'll just fix it for me. I don't need to care about it. And I can't make every engineer, JavaScript engineer, every front-end engineer use a screen reader with their browser. I can't make them do that. I contribute to ARIA spec. So the way that browsers are supposed to do things for accessibility reasons, I can contribute to that. I can write good libraries. I can try to put it into tooling in such a way that as much of it as possible is automated. And I can try to convince engineers slowly but surely that this is superior code. So it's kind of a multifaceted approach, or as Microsoft would say, a multi-channel approach. Everyone has their view on that, but there's a lot of different ways to come at it. If you care works for some people, is built into your tooling, works for a lot of other people. You just have to figure out and keep trying and keep pushing forward. One of my most recent performance reviews is that she's relentless about accessibility, but she doesn't make us feel bad about it. And I think that's my secret. Secret, not secret, because I'm telling everybody. And you can try it too. Try this at home, please. Like, relentless about it and don't make people feel bad about it. And you can keep pushing things forward.
Hey folks, it's Robbie here. Let me tell you a quick story. A few years back, a company hired us to keep the lights on while they migrated off of their Ruby on Rails app. They had decided, as an organization, to sunset it and move everything to the SaaS platform. During that migration period, their Ruby on Rails engineers had got new jobs and left. So we were asked to step in and keep things stable during that transition period. Well, that migration didn't go as planned. That new platform couldn't handle what they needed, and they had some serious roadblocks. So instead of starting all over or hiring a whole new team in-house, they asked us to take the lead. We modernized their app, we extended it, and turned it into something they could build their business on again. Fast forward a few years, they're thriving, and they still don't need a full-time engineering team now. We're their go-to crew. So if you're a company staring down a big rewrite or a platform migration, or just looking for a steady hand to move things forward, this is what we do. We work with Ruby on Rails, React, Laravel, and others. So if your manager is open to outside help, send them our way. planetargon.com. Again, that's planetargon.com. All right, let's get back to the show. For those listening, and maybe they're curious or they felt like they've brought this up with their team and maybe heard some, whatever, maybe they perceive there'd be a little bit of pushback, or maybe there's a little bit like, okay, we'll maybe start thinking a little bit more about this in the near future, maybe, and they're not really sure so maybe they feel like they've asked and maybe felt like they weren't heard. So rather than them just kind of like, oh, well, I'll just go about my business and keep kind of following I'm air quoting the patterns of how we've historically worked as a team and how we thought about accessibility. What advice could you offer like that one person who doesn't maybe feel like they have, they're not in a leadership role. Maybe they don't want to be seen as relentless necessarily, or maybe they do, but they're like, I've advocated for it, I think, but it just doesn't seem to be a priority right now. What kind of encouragement or suggestions do you have for them on how they can maybe try to make some progress in that without necessarily having to look for a new job or something?
So this is the question I get asked at every conference by at least 5 developers afterwards. No, it's great. Because this is advice at scale, right? Do demos. So record yourself navigating using a screen reader, show how screen readers are used, record it. Don't make anyone else do it. Record it yourself and just have the demo there for people to look at. Everybody has a hack day. Suggest a hack day. Everyone can work on what they want, and then you have time to make this demo. You can also start writing it into your own tests. You can start leaving PR reviews that are not aggressive about it. Just, hey, have you thought about how someone that's a keyboard only user would use this? And have you thought about how would X person do this? Asking those kinds of questions tends to have more of a positive effect than we need to care about people who have disabilities, or you need to pay me to work on this thing. And the thing that has been detrimental to me in the past, and I have observed being detrimental for other accessibility advocates, engineers, designers, is when we get too intense or too really gripping onto this, like, no, you must let me do this. This is like Steve wanting to rewrite the project in a different framework, like you've got to bring the business use case, you've got to bring what competitive advantage, understand your users, and ask questions in a curious way. And by trying out these different approaches, you can find the one that works for your situation, because it might not work at your next job, but it might work at this one, or vice versa. So there's just a lot. Bring your curiosity. Give folks the benefit of the doubt that they can be curious too, and give them a chance to surprise you.
I think that's some really wise advice there. It's not that different to how we often talk about technical debt on this podcast, and just like how you sell tech debt, and every time someone talks about like could we refactor this or rewrite this part of the application, it's such a big lift seemingly, but if you can outline like a good business case for it, there's a lot of things that come up. And rather than be like, I think your point about it, there's definitely this may be the right thing to do. There's also liability things, risk things that people could be using that may or may not work with the people that you're working with at the moment, but it might at some point. Or like, hey, I know that you mentioned the enterprise clients, like, hey, I know that at some point this will probably be a thing. I heard Melanie on Maintainable talk about this, and we're going to have to figure this out one day. Wouldn't it make more sense to start making some baby steps today? Thanks for that. A couple of quick last questions for you. Is there a non-software book that you find yourself recommending to folks in our industry to check out?
A few. I will just mention one series called Cradle. It's power scaling fantasy or power leveling fantasy, kind of like Solo Leveling the Anime, if folks have heard of that.
I'm not familiar with this.
But it's fun. It's really fun. And this series called Cradle has a lot of I'll say tropes or cliches in it, but you find yourself not minding so much because they're so entertaining. And the characters are just written in a really fun way, and they don't take themselves too seriously. And there's still the struggle of good and evil or something. And then it's at scale. So the fights just get bigger and grander and more interesting. So it's a really fun series to recommend. And there's like 13 books in the series, so it could keep you busy for a while. Even if you enjoy audiobooks, the author picked a really great narrator who has just a great tempo. You can listen to it at 1x speed or 1.5, and you'll still get a great energy in the story. And he's recently kickstarted it to have it turned into an animated series. And I ended up backing it because I was like, yes, I want this to exist in the world, So that's definitely the one I'll recommend.
Excellent. And that's, is that Will Wight?
Correct. Yes.
All right. I'm doing my little sleuthing here on the internet. And that starts off with a book called Unsold.
Correct.
All right. I will include links to that in the show notes for people. And where can listeners best follow your thoughts and ruminations about accessibility and software online?
Everything I do is linked from melanie.codes, my website. You can kind of find me, my Mastodon or my Blue Sky or my Instagram or GitHub or whatever you're into. I occasionally blog. All of that's linked from there. So that's probably the best place to find me.
Wonderful. Well, it's been such a delight having you join us on Maintainable, Melanie. Thank you so much for stopping by to talk shop with us.
Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Maintainable, a Planet Argon production. Editing by Claudia Armbruster. Post-production by Autumn Morgan and Ellis Fenson. Emotional support from the letter M. For Maintainable, for momentum, for making things better. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Keep showing up. See you next time.
maintain a